Hey everybody, this is MJ. I hope you all are doing well. I am back with another video about Project-186, and in this video we will be talking about potential. So the concept of potential is very essential to the core message of the project. As you can see here, it's their first pillar. Pillar number 1 is potential, and there's a little bit of a description here that I'll read. So Project-186 knows that every human holds a vast amount of potential and intrinsic value. We reject systems that limit the pursuit of greater potential. Project-186 believes that individuals have a duty to become better versions of themselves and should be held accountable for negligence. Project-186 understands that to pursue one's potential can only be a personal decision, and an individual cannot be forced to change. So I'll go over what these points mean in a moment, but I think it's important to kind of understand what the concept of potential even means in the first place, right? So potential is something that exists as part of an object. It already exists. It's not in the real world necessarily, but it's kind of defined already as part of an object. For example, consider a deck of cards. If there's a deck of cards sitting on the table, it's going to be in some current configuration, right? Maybe it's completely sorted. Maybe it's mixed up in some way. But if I shuffle that deck of cards, it enters a new state. And that state was already part of the potential of the deck, right? There's like 52 factorial different combinations of cards that are all in this space of potential for this deck, even though there's only one current realized state. Now, note that these states aren't all created equally, right? Some are more interesting than others. If I were to shuffle the deck, it would naturally enter something that looks very chaotic and very random. And it's not that that particular state is more likely than any other. It's just that it has less meaning. So how does this description of potential translate to the potential of an individual human, for example? Well, I think there's two kind of key takeaways. So the first is that the space of potential is huge, right? Even though there's only 52 cards in the deck, that's a kind of small number. Once you introduce the element of complexity, the ability to configure them in whatever way you want, all of a sudden the possible states of that just explode into this massive number, right? 52 factorial is huge. It's bigger than any number that you could ever realistically count to or conceive of. And humans are complex systems. They are definitely more complex than a deck of cards. So there is sort of this naturally infinite space of possible states of a human. The second takeaway is that potential is kind of invisible, right? This also has to do with the fact that it's so massive, that the space is so big, but like I can look at this deck of cards and I can understand that any configuration is possible, but I can't write them all down. I can't actually judge them and see them all at once. I can't interact with them until I actually shuffle the deck and observe a configuration. And maybe with a deck of cards, it's a little more easy to calculate and judge the different configurations, but as soon as you start adding layers and layers of complexity, like humans, markets, societies, communities, it almost becomes this incalculable problem of what are the possible states, how do we get to these possible states, and so on. But note, no matter what the system is, no matter how complex the system is, the potential still flows in the same direction. It flows towards that more shuffled, more chaotic state. So if you're a ball on top of the hill, you're going to roll down the hill. If you're a deck of cards being shuffled, you're going to become random. And this is kind of where the project comes in, because the project says, well, humans, we are actually special. Our potential is very vast, very invisible, like other systems, but we have some ability to make decisions and make changes on our own accord, which kind of adds that extra element of responsibility in order to kind of find the best potential and almost climb up the hill and organize the deck of cards instead of just letting the deck flow into a shuffled state, instead of just letting the ball roll down the hill. Okay, so back to the pillar, back to Project-186. 186 knows that every human holds a vast amount of potential. This is basically saying what I just talked about in terms of the massive space of potentials, right? Humans are incredibly complex. there is this huge amount of potential futures and potential different things for us to kind of realize as we, move day to day. And some are kind of better than others, right? That's not really debatable, right? Like tomorrow you could drive off a cliff, or, tomorrow you could sit around all day and do nothing and eat junk food and be lazy, or tomorrow you could, exercise and kind of become a healthier version of yourself, right? Those are all things you could do. And it's kind of clear that some of those will lead to better results, right? It's not really always clear exactly what's good and bad. That's also a very complicated question, but the fact that good and bad futures exist is undeniable. So what does it mean that the project rejects systems that limit the pursuit of greater potential? Well, that just means that there are certain systems in place that limit better human potential. For example, like the fast food industry is incredibly incentivized to make you addicted to fast food, and that is not good. That's going to lead to sort of a worse future for you if you are addicted to fast food. Or if you're, have a 9 to 5 that's really boring and you're not really using your secret talent of being, a master singer or something, that is kind of limiting the possible impact you could make in this world and the possible good you could provide, because you are forced to be part of this system. And you might say something like, well, what if I can't afford a good meal? What if I don't have time to cook? What if I have to work to support my family? Well, that is exactly the point. The point is that the fact that the systems in place aren't allowing humans to pursue greater potential is a bad thing. And that is the problem that the project is trying to solve, is kind of bring forward a better world where potential is more easily realized and is less of this like massive challenge, and you don't have to make these huge sacrifices and these gambles in order to pursue better potential. Now, the second point here says that 186 believes that individuals have a duty to become better versions of themselves and should be held accountable for neglecting that duty. Now, this seems like a little bit of a pivot from the first point, right? Because the first point was like, oh, these systems are holding us back. But the second point is saying, well, no, it's actually your fault. You're the one who has the choice, the power to pursue potential. And this may seem a little contradictory, but I think the idea stands if you look at it sort of as a two-way battle, right? It's a battle between your internal potential and the external forces that you can navigate within. So going back to the deck example, you might have a situation where maybe some of the cards in the deck are fixed, right? Maybe the first card is an ace of spades, the second card is a 6 of diamonds, whatever. And those are fixed, but you can move the other cards, right? So you are faced with some situation, some life circumstance. It's the hand that you are dealt, right? You are dealt some hand, some things you can't change. This can include external situations, even something like your genetics or your environment growing up, or unlucky things that happen to you, or fortunate things that happen to you. Anything that happens outside of your control is part of this external world. So what the project is saying is that, well, yes, maybe the external world is bad and maybe these systems are holding us back, but it doesn't matter, right? Because those things are outside of our control, and it's up to you, it's up to the individual to navigate their internal world and to pursue potential as great as they can within the scope that they are able to. So therefore, it's unrealistic and it's unfair to judge people for their external circumstances and their things that they can't control. But the other side of that is, well, we should hold people accountable, and we should, have a sense of duty to our internal selves and to our decisions in order to navigate the internal world as best as we can. And this doesn't mean that you have to get up at 5 a.m. and do 100 push-ups and go on a 10-mile run every day to be a good person. The project isn't giving you a specific thing you have to do to, fulfill your potential. And it understands that, these things are very complicated and everyone has different situations and enjoys different things. And it's not always obvious what is, the best thing to do in order to kind of fulfill this duty. It's more about making the decision in the first place to fight at all, right? Because you don't have to. You can kind of live in this external world fully, and we have all these systems that can guide us and can, incentivize different things, and you can kind of just live in that world and kind of forget about your potential and just allow yourself to be consumed by the external world and the systems that are in place. And this kind of flows naturally into the last point here, where Project-186 understands that to pursue one's potential can only be a personal decision. An individual cannot be forced to change. And this is kind of further cementing this idea that actually goes pretty deep into the philosophy of the project, that, it might not be easy and it might not be clear on what the specifics are to do, but fundamentally there is kind of this simple choice to make the decision to kind of make this personal leap of faith and kind of have conviction and fight for a better self, for a better future, for a better humanity. And you might kind of look at this and be like, okay, well, what does it actually mean? Like, what does it mean to fight for your potential? And how do I even know where to start? And I think that's kind of the point of the project. That's what the project is offering, is it's giving a map of potential. It's giving kind of a list of things to do, a list of things to study, to try to understand about the world and about humanity in order to kind of fully capture what it means to be a good person and what it means to fulfill your duties and so on. And the other important thing to understand about the project is that it's being expressed in this very modern context. And it's kind of saying that, well, there's so much technology and there's all these things available in the modern world to use, that potential is greater than it's ever been. Like, through the power of the internet and through the power of creation of things with AI and, outreach through social media, you have more potential than you ever could have had in the history of the world. The project is kind of offering a way to consolidate what it means to, make this simple decision in the face of all this craziness and this complexity of the modern world. And one more possible confusion or contradiction that I'll mention is that you might be confused on, well, okay, how do we hold people accountable and understand that it's people's duty to fight for their potential, but also respect their decision and know that it's fundamentally their choice to do so? And the project doesn't pretend to know everything when it comes to this. And this kind of is the challenge, right? Like, how do we create a society? How do we create a world where people don't just act well, but choose to do so? For example, if you look at the law in most developed modern countries, it's pretty well aligned with what most people would consider to be good human truths, like don't kill, don't steal, everyone is equal, these sorts of things. And that's a good thing. And there should be these systems, these structures that present and approximate human truths. But in order to progress as a society, it's not just the systems that have to change. It's the internal attitudes and philosophies of individuals that guide their actions and kind of create the world that also has to evolve in time. And that is what the project is trying to offer, is this way of restructuring personal faith for a more natural, more human future. So, to summarize, potential is a battle. It's a fight between the uncontrollable forces that set the stage and set the limits on what is actually possible, and the internal force, the internal decision to navigate this space of potential as best as you can. And Project-186 is saying that we want to change the external world, and in order to do so, we must operate within this internal world. And it is a simple decision. It might not be easy, but you have an obligation to make that decision to navigate your space of potential as best as you can in order to align with humanity. And the project is offering a description of what that means and a list of things to study, a list of things to execute in order to align this future better. So anyway, will be it from me this video. Thanks to anybody who made it this far. This is certainly a complicated part of the project. Potential itself is very confusing, but I hope to make more videos about it, and I also hope to dive into other parts of the project, and hopefully some things will clear up as we begin to understand more about what the project is offering and more about what is actually being said and what is actually being encouraged through this, quote, pursuit of potential thing. Anyways, thanks for watching. Have a great day.